I didn't notice him at first. That's the thing about love sometimes. It sneaks up on you so quietly that by the time you realize it's been there all along, you've already built your entire life around its absence. I was 23 when I first walked into Sal's Diner on 5th Street, fresh out of a relationship that had left me feeling like I'd been hollowed out and filled with static. The kind of breakup where you don't know who you are anymore because you'd spent so long being half of something that felt whole. The diner was one of those places that time forgot, in the best possible way. Red vinyl booths patched with duct tape, a jukebox in the corner that only played songs from the 70s, and a counter with 12 stools that had probably been there since the place opened in 1962. The air always smelled like coffee and bacon grease, and something sweet I could never quite identify. Cinnamon, maybe, or hope. I'm not sure there's a difference. I took a seat at the counter because the booths felt too big for one person, too obviously meant for couples or families or groups of friends laughing over shared fries. Stool number 7, right in the middle. The vinyl was cracked and the chrome base squeaked when I spun around, which I did, twice, because sometimes you need to feel like a kid again when everything else feels too heavy. That's when I saw him. The guy working behind the counter, filling coffee cups with this practiced efficiency that somehow still looked gentle. He had dark hair that fell across his forehead, the kind that probably annoyed him but looked perfect to everyone else. And his name tag said Roscoe in faded red letters, and when he looked up at me, I felt something shift in my chest. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of shift, just a small adjustment, like a book being placed back on a shelf where it belonged. "Coffee?" he asked, and his voice was deeper than I expected, warm like the mug he was already reaching for. "Please," I said, and watched as he poured it with the confidence of someone who'd done this 10,000 times, but still cared enough to stop before it reached the brim, leaving room for cream. I became a regular without meaning to. At first, it was just convenient. The diner was 2 blocks from my new apartment, the one I'd moved into after the breakup because I couldn't stand being in a space that still smelled like someone else's cologne. Then it became routine. Then it became necessary, though I wouldn't have admitted why, not even to myself. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning before work, and Sunday afternoons when the weekend felt too long and too empty. I always sat at stool number 7. Roscoe always poured my coffee before I asked. We developed this rhythm, this unspoken choreography of small interactions that felt bigger than they were. "How's your week?" he'd ask, wiping down the counter near my cup. "Getting through it," I'd say, which was code for barely surviving but trying to look like I had my life together. He never pushed, just nodded like he understood, like those 3 words contained entire volumes he'd read before in his own life. Sometimes he'd slide a piece of pie toward me. On the house we made too much, even though I could see through the kitchen window that there were plenty of slices left. Blueberry was my favorite, and somehow he always remembered. The diner had its cast of regulars. There was Margaret, who came in every morning at 6:30 and ordered the same thing for 40 years according to the other waitress, Donna. There was Paul, who read the newspaper at the end of the counter and did the crossword in pen like some kind of superhero. There was a rotating cast of construction workers, nurses coming off night shifts, insomniacs, and people like me who needed a place that felt like something when everything else felt like nothing. But stool number 7 was mine. I didn't think much of it until one Sunday afternoon when I came in later than usual and saw a couple standing near the counter looking for seats. There were only 2 stools open, mine and the one next to it. Roscoe was at the register. Wait, and I watched as the man reached for my stool. "Sorry, that one's taken," Roscoe said quickly, gesturing to stool number 8 instead. "This one's available, though." The couple took the 2 stools on the end and didn't question it, but I stood there in the doorway, my heart doing something complicated in my chest, watching Roscoe glance toward the door like he was looking for someone. When he saw me, his whole face changed. Not a smile exactly, but something softer. Relief, maybe. I sat down at stool number 7, and he poured my coffee without a word. 3 years passed like that, then 5, then 8. I got a better job, one that actually used my degree in graphic design. I made new friends, went on a few dates that went nowhere, adopted a cat named Humphrey, who hated everyone but tolerated me. My life filled back up with things that mattered, But the diner remained constant. Roscoe remained constant. We talked more as the years went on. Real conversations, not just pleasantries. I learned that he'd grown up in Vermont, that he'd moved to the city to study music, but ended up at the diner when his father got sick, and he needed steady income to help with bills. He still played guitar, sometimes at open mic nights at a bar 3 streets over. I learned that he noticed everything, which regulars were having bad days, who needed their coffee topped off before they asked, when the jukebox was about to eat someone's quarters. "You're good at this," I told him once, gesturing vaguely at the diner, the counter, the whole ecosystem he maintained. "At pouring coffee?" He smiled, and I noticed for the first time that he had a small scar near his left eyebrow. "At making people feel less alone," I said, and immediately wished I hadn't because it felt too honest, too revealing. But Roscoe just looked at me with those steady brown eyes and said, "Yeah, well, some people are worth keeping company." I started noticing things I'd been too guarded to see before, the way he always positioned himself at my section of the counter when I was there, even if it meant walking past other customers. The way he laughed at my stupid jokes about work, the kind that weren't actually funny, but he made them feel funny by laughing anyway. The way he remembered details I'd mentioned weeks ago, that my mother was visiting, that I had a presentation coming up, that Humphrey had knocked over an entire bookshelf at 2 in the morning. And I noticed that stool number 7 was always saved for me. Even during the Sunday morning rush when every other seat was full and people were waiting, that stool remained empty until I arrived. I started testing it, coming at different times, and every single time, it was open. Once, I watched from across the street as a man in a business suit tried to sit there, and Roscoe politely redirected him to a booth. "Why do you do that?" I finally asked one Thursday morning when the diner was quiet, and it was just us and Margaret and the sound of eggs sizzling in the kitchen. "Do what?" Roscoe was refilling the sugar dispensers, his hands steady and sure. "Keep that seat open for me." He stopped moving, just for a second, but I caught it. Then he set down the sugar container and looked at me directly, and I felt that shift again. Bigger this time. Tectonic. "Because you sit there," he said simply. "You always have. It's your seat." "But what if I didn't come in one day?" "Then I'd save it anyway," he said, and went back to the sugar dispensers like he hadn't just said something that rearranged my entire understanding of the past 8 years. I should have said something then, should have asked what I was too afraid to ask, should have acknowledged what was building in the space between us like pressure before a storm. But I was good at not saying things, good at keeping myself safe behind walls I'd built so carefully after that first heartbreak that I'd forgotten they were there. So I just said, "Thank you," and drank my coffee and pretended my hands weren't shaking. Year 9, year 10. I watched Roscoe's hair start to show gray at the temples. He watched me finally get promoted to art director, listened to me stress about the responsibility, celebrated with an extra large slice of pie with 2 forks. We existed in this strange in-between space, not quite friends, not quite strangers, something undefined that felt more important than either. I went on a date with a guy named Marcus who worked in finance and had kind eyes and laughed at all the right moments. It lasted 3 months before fizzling out, not because anything was wrong, but because nothing was particularly right either. When I came into the diner the day after we ended things, Roscoe took one look at my face and poured my coffee in silence. "You okay?" he asked after a few minutes. "I'm always okay," I said, which was my default answer, my shield. "No, you're not," he said gently. "And that's okay too." I looked up at him, at this man who'd been a constant in my life for a decade, who knew how I took my coffee and what kind of pie I needed on bad days and when to talk and when to just be present. And I felt something crack open inside me, something I'd been keeping locked and pressurized for so long, I'd forgotten it was there. "Why are you so nice to me?" I asked, and my voice came out smaller than I intended. Roscoe set down the coffee pot, leaned against the counter across from me, close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, the way his jaw tightened like he was making a decision. "You really don't know?" he asked. I shook my head. He exhaled slowly, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet but steady. "I've been saving that seat for you for 11 years because the first time you walked in here, you looked so lost and so brave at the same time, And I thought I'd never seen anyone more beautiful. And then you kept coming back, and I got to know you, really know you, and you were funny and smart and kind even when you were hurting. And I saved your seat because I wanted you to have a place that was always yours, because I wanted to be someone you could count on, because I was hoping that maybe, eventually, you'd see that I was here, that I've always been here. The diner went silent around us, or maybe it just felt that way because all I could hear was my own heartbeat and the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my entire world realigning. 11 years, I whispered. 11 years, he confirmed. I know it's probably weird, and I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable. I thought you were straight, I interrupted, and then started laughing because it was so stupid, so obvious in hindsight. All those years of carefully not hoping, not letting myself see what was right in front of me because I'd assumed it wasn't possible. Roscoe smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his whole face. I'm very much not straight. I thought you knew. I thought that's why you kept coming back. I kept coming back because the coffee's good, I said, and we both knew it was a lie, and we both laughed anyway. The coffee's terrible, Roscoe said. It's been terrible for 11 years. We buy the cheapest beans. The pie, then? The pie's good. The pie's from a supplier. We just heat it up. So you're telling me I've been coming here for 11 years for mediocre coffee and reheated pie? Yeah, Roscoe said softly, leaning closer. Why do you think that is? I looked at him, really looked at him, and let myself feel everything I'd been pushing down for years. The warmth in my chest when I walked through the door and saw him. The way my day felt incomplete if I didn't stop by. The way I'd turned down dates and opportunities and entire potential relationships, because nothing felt as right as sitting at this counter, on this stool, talking to this man who'd been patiently, quietly, impossibly waiting for me to catch up. I said slowly, it might be because I'm in love with you, and I think I have been for a really long time. Roscoe's eyes went bright, and I watched him blink fast like he was trying not to cry, and then he was reaching across the counter and taking my hand, and his palm was warm and calloused and perfect. Yeah? He asked, and his voice broke a little on the word. Yeah, I said, but I'm scared. I'm so scared of this, of us, of what happens if it doesn't work. I know, Roscoe said, squeezing my hand. I've been scared for 11 years, but I kept saving your seat anyway. That's what you do when you love someone. You save them a place and hope they'll eventually sit down and stay. Margaret cleared her throat from the end of the counter, and we both jumped. I'd completely forgotten there was anyone else in the diner. About damn time, she said, not looking up from her scrambled eggs. We've been taking bets on when you two would figure it out. I just won $50. You've been betting on us? I asked, incredulous. Everyone's been betting on you, Donna called from the kitchen window. Even Sal had money on this, and he's been dead for 6 years. Roscoe laughed, and the sound was so full of joy and relief that I started laughing too. And then I was standing up and leaning across the counter and kissing him, finally kissing him, and he tasted like coffee and cinnamon, and coming home. We took it slow after that, which felt absurd given that we'd already spent 11 years getting to know each other. But we went on actual dates. Dinner at a Thai place where he told me about growing up with 3 sisters, a concert where I watched him light up talking about music theory, a Saturday afternoon where we walked through the city and he pointed out all the places he'd thought about me over the years, the park bench where he'd eaten lunch and wondered if I was having a good day, the bookstore where he'd seen a graphic design magazine and almost bought it just to understand my work better, the street corner where he'd once seen someone who looked like me from behind and his heart had jumped before he realized it wasn't me. That's a little stalkerish, I teased, but I was holding his hand and smiling. That's love, he corrected. You take up space in someone's head, in their heart, in their whole life, even when they're not with you. I still came to the diner on Tuesdays and Thursdays and Sundays, still sat at stool number 7. But now Roscoe would lean across the counter and kiss me when he poured my coffee, and the other regulars would pretend not to notice, even though Margaret always smiled into her eggs. Now we'd make plans for after his shift, and I'd wait at the counter doing work on my laptop just to be near him. Now the diner felt less like a refuge and more like a beginning. 6 months in, I met his sisters on a video call, and they all talked over each other, telling embarrassing stories about him while he blushed and tried to change the subject. A year in, he met my parents, and my mother pulled me aside afterward and said, "That's someone who sees you, really sees you. Don't let him go." I introduced him to my friends, who immediately loved him because he was impossible not to love. He introduced me to his open mic night crowd. And I sat in the audience and watched him play guitar and sing and felt so full of pride and love I thought I might burst. We moved in together after 2 years, into a bigger apartment that could fit both our lives. Humphrey hated Roscoe for exactly 3 days before deciding he was acceptable, which Roscoe took as a major victory. We created routines, Sunday morning crosswords over coffee, Tuesday night cooking experiments that sometimes worked and sometimes ended in ordering pizza, Thursday evening walks around the neighborhood. Simple things that felt extraordinary because we were doing them together. The diner changed ownership eventually. Sal's nephew took over and wanted to modernize, talking about craft coffee and artisanal pastries and renovating the whole space. Roscoe decided it was time to move on, to finally pursue music seriously, to take a chance on the dream he'd deferred for so long. His last day was bittersweet, full of regulars stopping by to say goodbye and thank you and we'll miss you. But before they changed anything, before they ripped out the old counter and replaced the vinyl stools, I went in one last time. Sat at stool number 7, Roscoe stood across from me in his street clothes instead of his work uniform, and we just looked at each other, remembering. 11 years, I said. You saved this seat for 11 years. Best decision I ever made, Roscoe said, right up there with finally telling you why. What happens to the stool? I asked. When they renovate? Roscoe smiled, that smile that still made my heart skip. I bought it. Outright. It's in our living room now. Your seat. Always. And it is. Stool number 7 sits in our apartment, reupholstered but still the same underneath, still squeaking when you spin around. Sometimes I sit there in the morning with my coffee, and Roscoe will come up behind me and kiss the top of my head. And I think about all the years of almost, of nearly, of not quite yet. All that time he was saving me a place, telling everyone it was taken, waiting patiently for me to be ready to fill it. Love isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and patient. Sometimes it's a saved seat and reheated pie and someone who sees you at your most lost and decides you're worth waiting for. Sometimes it takes 11 years to recognize what's been there all along. But when you finally sit down, when you finally let yourself stay, it's worth every single moment of the wait.